JSP Basics I. So these are the topics that we are going to cover. So in this presentation, basic concepts of JSP will be addressed, and next week we will get into a bit more advanced topics of JSP. So JSP has enough contents. I decided to divide into two sessions, Basics 1 and Basics 2. So what is JSP? So JSP is basically text-based document capable of returning both the static and dynamic content to a client browser, just like a servlet. However, difference between servlet and JSP is that JSP is like HTML page. So JSP page can have both static and dynamic content, and static contents are made with HTML and XML, and dynamic contents will be created from programming code inside the JSP, and also usage of Java beans and also custom tags. So why you want to use JSP technology as opposed to Servlet? So we are going to compare Servlet against JSP in a few minutes in a bit more detail, but basically JSP technology was designed because Servlet was just too difficult to create a display page. So usage of JSP page allows separation of business logic from presentation. So presentation is in the form of HTML or XML, while business logic is implemented in the form of Java beans or custom tags. So by separating business logic from presentation, you can have better maintainability and reusability. On the other hand, in Servlet, if you're trying to take care of the presentation as well as business logic, you have to mix those things too, and it's rather difficult to maintain. JSP technology is extensible with what is called the custom tags, and we are going to cover custom tags later on in this course. JSP technology is based on Servlet technology. In fact, JSP page gets compiled. When it's deployed, it gets compiled into Servlet. So once it's compiled, everything is Servlet. This is a very simple JSP page. As you can see, this is like HTML page. So we have a hello world message on the top, and then we have JSP use beans. And this is like creating an object instance of this bean whose class is this, and then we are going to save it as an ID of clock in the scope object, and then in your JSP page you can call the method of the bean. Like in this case, we are calling get day of the month method of that bean, and here we are getting the year of the clock. So you can see these Java beans is used to provide dynamic content, while this is static content. So comparison of JSP against the Servlet. So in Servlet, you are creating HTML code in Java, which is very difficult thing to do, very cumbersome thing to do. You have seen that example in our previous hands-on lab, Hello 2 example, in which you are actually generating HTML code in in Java code. While in JSP, we are using HTML for creating a presentation, which is a lot easier thing to do. Servlet actually handles any form of data, while JSP is basically dealing with the structured text. So the key point of Servlet is that it's not easy to author a web page because you're doing it inside the Java code. In JSP, it's very easy to author a web page compared to Servlet, and then JSP page is going to get compiled into Servlet when it gets deployed. Oops. So this is a continuation of JSP, the benefits of usage of JSP over Servlet. So again, content and display logics are separated in JSP, and it's simpler to develop with JSP. If you need the dynamic behavior, you can use Java beans and custom tags. And it supports software reuse through the use of components. So when we say components, we are talking about Java beans and custom tags, and those Java beans and custom tags could be used in other JSP pages, so they are reused. The JSP pages, when they get deployed, when things are changed, they get recompiled automatically. And as we talked about, it's easier to author web pages compared to servlet code trying to create a web page through the Java code. And it's platform independent. Now, there are some cases. So in general, you want to use JSP over Servlet for creating a page, for creating presentation. And what that means is that you do not want to use a Servlet to create HTML code. And that's a very painful thing to do. However, there are some cases that you might want to use a Servlet over JSP. For example, if you are generating something that does not include HTML, such as graphs or a pie chart, in that case, Servlet might be a better choice than JSP. Or extending the functionality of a web server, such as supporting a new file format. If you need some kind of computation to be done, that's where the Servlet will be a better choice than JSP. Oops. So the question is, should I use Servlet or JSP? So in practice, Servlet and JSPs are used together. Okay, so in MVC architecture, model view controller architecture, Servlet is used as a front controller, while JSPs are used as views. So it's very typical. The Servlet and JSPs are used in a single application. Static versus dynamic contents. So static contents are typically static HTML page with a static text. So it provides the same display for everyone, while dynamic contents are dynamically generated based on some condition. Conditions could be user identity, meaning who's accessing the page, maybe time of the day, and maybe it depends on user entered values. Depending on what user has entered, the contents could be different. So examples like E-Trade or Yahoo, you could have a different page depending on who you are. So they might have your personalized page based on the login, the information they have. So those are dynamic contents. So simple example of static contents versus dynamic contents like this. So here we have a simple JSP page, and the content in blue color, they are static contents, meaning they don't get changed depending on who's actually accessing the page. However, this one is dynamic contents. So these contents get generated during runtime. So here we are creating a new data object, meaning depending on when it is accessed, the value will be different. So this is the output. So when you access the page that we have seen in previous slide, these are static contents, while the state information is dynamically created. So dynamic content creation in JSP page could be done like in Java code like this, or Java beans, or custom tags. And we are going to talk about those different ways of creating dynamic contents next week. Okay, servlets and JSPs versus web frameworks. In general, servlets and JSPs are considered very low-level technology for building real-life and production quality web applications because they do not provide features that are needed for typical production quality web applications such as dispatch framework, data binding, validation, and internationalization, and things like that. So it's highly likely that you're going to use popular MVC-based web application framework, which provides extra features like the ones that I just mentioned over vanilla servlet and JSP. So these MVC-based web application frameworks are built on the top of Servlet and JSP architecture, yet they actually provide high-level abstractions. So it's highly likely that you are going to use one of these web application frameworks rather than using Servlet and JSP directly. So examples of these web application frameworks include Spring MVC, Wicked, Tapestry, Struts 1 and 2, and there are a few more. Okay, JSP in a big picture of Java EE architecture. So in a multi-tier environment, so you have client application or browser on the left and accessing JSP and Servlet in the middle. So Servlet and JSP, they are web components running inside web container. And then we could have EJBs in the backend that provides business logic, and both web components, JSP and Servlet, and EJBs, they can access database. Okay? Even client application can access the database. But in general, your JSP and Servlet might delegate the business logic processing to EJB, and EJB then communicate with the database. That's the typical the 3-tier or 4-tier architecture. Okay, JSP architecture. So this picture shows various ways of creating the JSP pages. So from the left to the right, it increases complexity, and on the left, from top to bottom, it actually provides more robustness. So the least complex, meaning the simplest page, is going to be in the form of HTML page. And then the next level, you could have a JSP page, an HTML page, and you might have Servlet as well. And then you could have some JSP pages with modular components. So here, modular components, I'm talking about Java beans or custom tags. And then moving forward, you might have enterprise beans involved. You might actually use template and things like that. So I said separation of the content from display, but when you're using Servlet and JSP together, Servlet actually performs the logic of receiving request and then dispatching to some logic, maybe EJB, and then presentation is in the form of JSP. Okay. So in Servlet only architecture, Servlet performs request processing, meaning it receives the request. It does perform the business logic. It does also perform creation of presentation. But when you're using JSP, JSP is the one that actually does the presentation, while Servlet still is responsible for receiving requests, and then it is responsible for delegating to another Java code for performing business logic. And Java beans, those are components that actually capture some state, and these Java beans could be created as part of the Servlet, and then it will be used inside JSP. So JSP, as I said before, gets translated into Servlet when it gets deployed. So this is the picture basically. Let's see, I'm going to go into the life cycle of JSP page. So this is how things work. So when user request comes in, your server, in this case the container, will take a look at whether there is a JSP page that can handle it, and whether that JSP page in fact has been loaded or not. If it has not been loaded, or if it has been changed, then it will create the Servlet code, and then it will compile the Servlet and then execute the Servlet. So once it's compiled, it's a Servlet. Okay, so during runtime, basically everything is a Servlet inside the container. Okay, so JSP page lifecycle phases: translation phase, compile phase, and execution phase. So translation and compilation phase is that JSP pages, as I said before, gets translated into Servlet source code, and then it gets compiled. And it is done by the container automatically. And so this happens when JSP page is accessed first time. Okay, so translation will be done, and then compilation is done. But depending on the configuration, maybe JSP pages might be translated and compiled when the system is up and running. Okay. So, for example, if you have a JSP page called the page name, the source code might reside here. And it depends on the app server. But this could be an example of app server home, work, standard engine, localhost, and context root, and the page name, and JSP Java. Okay. Once Java code, servlet code is created, then it will be compiled, and then it's typically removed. Okay. So translation and compilation phase. So static template data is transformed into code that will emit data into the stream. Okay, so it's basically what we have seen in the servlet code last week. So that's what, that's the code that gets generated underneath by the container, so that you don't have to do code for generating the page. JSP elements, by the way, we have not covered these JSP elements like a JSP directive, JSP scripting elements, and the elements in the form of JSP XXX. These are called JSP elements. They are treated differently. So directives are used to control how web container translate and execute JSP pages. And scripting elements, this is the Java code, are inserted into JSP pages servlet class. And elements in the form of JSP XXX are converted into method calls to Java Beans components. So we are going to cover these three things later on in detail. So if you don't understand what I'm talking about, that's perfectly fine. Okay, just in translation and compilation phase, this is how it is done. Again, even these things you don't really have to know, okay, because this is done by the container, and this is just for your reference information only. Okay, so JSP lifecycle methods, including execution phase. So when JSP pages got translated into servlet code, there is JSP init method, and JSP service method, and JSP destroy method. Okay, so this is a servlet that contains these methods. So these methods are created by the servlet container when it translates JSP page into servlet. Okay. Finalization of JSP page. Here, declare methods for performing the following tasks using JSP declaration mechanism. Read persistence configuration data. Actually, I think I'm actually missing. Yeah, so, as we have seen in the previous slide, this is used for initialization, and JSP destroy is used for cleaning things up. So if we see initialization of JSP page, so inside of JSP init, you could perform some one-time initialization activities. For example, read persistence configuration data or initialization of resources and things like that. Okay. Again, it's very rare for you to override JSP init. Okay, so JSP init could be overwritten, but you rarely have to do those things. It's again for information only. Finalization of JSP page. So JSP destroy method gets invoked when the servlet is actually kind of destroyed in this case. So here you are going to do cleanup task. So this is init destroy.jsp example. By the way, it's really bad practice to use Java code inside JSP page, but for the sake of the syntax introduction of the page with the scriptlet code, you can do in fact you can perform initialization with JSP init, and then you can perform some cleanup activities inside JSP destroy. By the way, in order to include Java code in your JSP page, you are going to use this notation, %, and exclamation mark, and then you can include Java code inside your JSP page. But as I said a few minutes ago, having Java code, these are, by the way, called scriptlets. Having this Java code inside JSP page is very bad practice because it's very hard to read or maintain the code. Okay, steps for developing JSP-based web application. So these are the steps. So you are going to write the web component code. Here we are talking about Servlet or JSP, and you might write some helper classes as well if they are referenced by the Servlet and JSP code. And then you're going to write some static resources, for example, images and HTML pages. And then you're going to write web.xml file. And then you can build web application. Then you are going to deploy that web application into a server, web container, such as Tomcat or Glassfish. And then client can access your application. So first step is write and compile the web component code. Here again we are talking about JSP page or Servlet code. Okay. So if you're building an application using Ant, you might actually create build.xml file, or if you're using Maven, you might create a pom.xml file. If you're using, let's say, some kind of IDE, then IDE handles all this. Development tree structure. So keep web application source separate from the compiled code. So that's actually good practice. Again, if you're using IDE or Maven, the default development tree structure is created for you. So you don't have to worry about development tree structure of your own. Typically, they will have SRC directory and web directory, and SRC contains Java code, while web directory contains JSP pages and HTML pages and images. So example of Hello World application, basically on the web, it does have this graphics.gif file. It contains index.html file, and then it contains response.jsp file, and then it does have web.inf directory under which you have web.xml file. So in this simple application, we don't have any Java code because it's a very simple application that is made of just index.jsp page and response.jsp page. And second step is create any static resources. Again, it could be custom pages, login pages, error pages, whatever pages that you need for your application. And other resource type could be image files that are used by HTML page or JSP page. And then you're going to write web.xml file, as we have done for Servlet. Example we have seen before. So again, deployment descriptor contains deployment time, runtime instructions for web container, and it does have that URL alias mapping. And every web application has web.xml file except Java EE6 application. In Java EE6, web.xml file is optional because whatever configuration that you used to have in web.xml now could be specified through annotation in source code in Java EE6. But before Java EE6, meaning up to Java EE5, you have to have web.xml file. So this is an example of web.xml file. So here we have a servlet mapping, right? The greeting, and the difference here is that for this URL pattern, this servlet will be used, but this servlet is actually in fact JSP file, okay? Instead of the servlet in the case of servlet. And then you're going to build web application. Again, you can use an IDE or Maven. They handle all this construction of the WAR file. Okay. So it's likely to have build directory under which you will have web.inf directory and /classes directory if you have Java code. and web.xml file should be on the web.inf directory, and then all the resources again under the root. So for hello2 tree structure application, basically this is what you see on the build directories. You have web.inf directory and classes directory and web.xml file and GIF file, and then 2 JSP pages. And then you can install and deploy the web application. So you can deploy the application through the IDE, which is probably the most easiest way of doing it while you are doing a development. You can use Maven as well, and you can also deploy an application through admin console of the server. So Tomcat Manager is admin console for Tomcat. Glassfish has admin console. So through this admin console, you can deploy the application. And most servers also support what is called the auto deploy. So you can just copy the WAR file or exploited directory structure into this particular auto deployment directory, and then the server detects that new application is need to be redeployed or deployed for the first time. And then client can access the web application. So this is an example. And response.jsp page. So let's try to run that application. So we have hello JSP, JSP hello application. So here we have index.jsp page, and this is the case. So you can see this is just like HTML page, and we have a form, okay, and then we have this code. This is the Java code. Okay, so capturing a request parameter. So we learn how to capture request parameter coming from the client. So you can have this Java code inside the JSP, and then if there is a name is not null, and name length is greater than 0, then we are going to call the JSP page and the result. So in this case, the result is this. This result will be included right here. Okay. So if you run this application, so hello, my name is Duke, and what's yours? And this is the result. So this code is actually simpler than servlet code that we have seen in previous session. Another example is, this is very similar example. So index.jsp page. So you can actually use this JSTL. So we haven't learned the JSTL. By using JSTL, you can think of JSTL as custom tags. Okay, set of custom tags, common custom tags. So here we can say the length. If the length of the param username is greater than 0, then we are going to include JSP page of response. Okay, so it does the same thing as JSP hello 1. In fact, this is a bit more cleaner code. So if you run, and it should work the same. Okay. All right. Okay. So comparing hello 1 servlet and hello 2 JSP code. So basically, comparing servlet and JSP code that does the same simple thing, the one that we just saw. So this is a servlet code, right? And as you remember, you have to generate the presentation yourself. And this is so here we are generating HTML code, right? Which is very cumbersome to deal with, okay? On the other hand, JSP page is simpler. It still contains, in this example, Java code, which is again not good practice, but even with this Java code, this is much simpler than the servlet code that we have seen. So this is a response servlet code. Okay. Again, you are basically generating HTML, HTML fragment yourself. And this is a response.jsp page. Very simple. Now, at the end of the day, as I said before, JSP is servlet, meaning JSP page gets translated into servlet when it gets deployed. So JSP pages get translated into servlet, and for example, Tomcat translates greeting.jsp page into greeting $JSP.java. And scriptlet Java code within JSP page ends up being inserted into JSP servlet method of resulting servlet. So one of the methods that are being created is the init JSP and destroy JSP, and then we have a JSP service in the middle, and that's where your Java code is being inserted. And when it gets translated, implicit objects for servlets are also available for JSP. So we'll talk about the concept of implicit objects. These are the objects that are created by the container. So let me show you what I mean. So this is greeting JSP.java file that was created by the container after translation. And you can see it actually creates page context object, session object, application object, and config object, and even out object. Okay, so these objects are actually created as part of the translation. And so some extra code is actually done. Page context gets servlet context. So these are, you have a servlet context, servlet config, session object, and out. So these are all created when they are translated, and then it generates this code. So when JSP page gets translated into servlet, it's the container that does generate all this the code that actually write things out with write the HTML fragment to the client. Okay, so that is my end of my presentation. So I'm going to actually show you one more example. So this is a bit cleaner example of Hello 2. So I showed both, right? Okay, and they were the same. I think I showed that. Okay, so that is the end of my presentation. So